And so we have six ballot measures that I think we'll go ahead and attack first, because those are probably the ones that people are going to be looking for as they start their ballot stuff. I mean, we've got, just a couple weeks until early voting starts. The first one on there is one that maybe not too many people have thought about too much. The changes to the way elections at the school board are done. Right now, anybody that runs for a school board seat in Okaloosa County or anywhere else doesn't register with the party. So you don't see like a little R or a little D next to them. As a precinct committeeman, what kind of scuttlebutt have you heard about this amendment, and what is the GOP, either at the state level or here at the local level, saying about this amendment?
Well, this was crafted by the state legislature. So there's a good deal of Republican backing for it, because to get out of the state legislature is a constitutional amendment. The Republican Party is generally behind it, and that's the case in this instance. The declaration of your party does a couple of things. One, it allows voters who don't know the candidate very well to at least get a perspective of where they stand with their general priorities and their allegiance in the way the two parties differ. But a second order effect of all this is that should one or more candidates from different parties get through the primary, then they would go to the general election. So in the primaries, the turnout rate is, I'm just going to throw out roughly 30%, give or take. But in the general election, the turnout rate is roughly 70%. So by doing this, it then has a greater participation by the voters as to select that school board member. And also in Okaloosa County, if you attend any of the debates or listen to the candidates, you can pretty well tell where their values lie and which party they affiliate with. So even though the candidate can't declare and can't say, you generally know how they align and which party they're with. So this really doesn't change much, except to say that by pushing it into the general, you're going to get a lot more people to do some research and be informed about their vote on that school board member.
Absolutely. And so moving on to Amendment 2, we're talking about a state constitutional right to hunt and fish. And just by looking at the language on this this particular referendum, it doesn't say, hunt and fish what or with what, weaponry or anything like that. It's just like you have a state constitutional right to hunt and fish. What is the party saying about this state constitutional right? And what is y'all's perspective as people go to the polls on November 5th?
Yeah, once again, the Republican Party is for this. And I think most people think this is already a right, that the state of Florida has the Fish and Wildlife Commission that do the permitting, that set the quotas and do, where and when type of legislation and put bounds around what that is. But I think most people already consider the right to hunt and fish in the state of Florida as something that's there. This really codifies it and says now it's going to be in the Constitution, and everybody knows, and should at some point in the future something come along that would say, well, now we need to maybe infringe on that, it's now in the Constitution. And a number of other states have done it. Not that that's a valid reason, but Florida isn't unique in this. So it really just places something in the document that is the governing constitution for the state that says this is a right. But you're correct to point out some of the things that are in there, such as hunting and fishing will be the preferred method of species population control, and by traditional means, which includes obviously hunting, bow, fishing, etc. So should there at some point be some type of limitation or restriction, there could be a good case to say this is not permitted because, as the Constitution defines, these are already our overarching superseding document. So legal challenges would have a tough go.
Okay, and so the FWC would still be able to say you can only, get $3 this year, or you can get 7 red snapper or something like that. It's not going to change anything like that.
Right. And that's stated in the amendment that will be on the ballot, that this does not infringe on their rights to regulate the industries and regulate this activity in the state.
Okay. And so moving on to amendment number 3, and this is one of the 2 amendments that you told me before we started this interview that the Republican Party has pretty much said to vote against, right? And that's the recreational or personal use of marijuana. Can you kind of explain either the local or the state GOP's position on this amendment and why they feel that way?
Yeah. So first of all, I think everybody already understands that medical marijuana is legal in the state, and that addresses a specific population that can derive a significant benefit from the use of it. So that aside, what this is doing is opening it up, as everybody has seen from other states, to recreational use for those 21 years of age or older. There's any number of reasons that the state Republican Party and the local Okaloosa County oppose this. First, I'll just start with the tourism. Having been a condominium owner down on Okaloosa Island for a number of years in a couple of different buildings, when medical marijuana was passed, the number of complaints from people that would come down for family vacations and expect to see the same environment they had previously, it went ballistic. Is that while people were consuming marijuana, specifically the smokable kind, which produces an odor, it is not limited to where the person consumes it, because as soon as they open their door, it just waffles and permeates throughout the area and infringes on other people who don't want to be exposed to that. So that had a real negative personal impact, because the people that were renting from us often complained, and they would post it, and then that would cause detriment to future bookings. That happens. And talked to a number of realtors. They said, don't worry, it's not just the places where I owned, but it's up and down. They encounter it all over the place. And that's just not a good situation for us with the tourism industry. The second, there's a number of things out there that says, well, by doing this, you're going to decrease the amount of illegal activity. Well, actually, what the states that have done it have found is it does not, because it is so heavily regulated and taxed that they have to charge a good sum for the product. So the black market, who's not heavily regulated, who's not heavily taxed, obviously, that's why it's the black market, they undercut those prices significantly. So you've just expanded the eligible population for consumption. And so the black market, illegal market, flourishes, because people will say, I'm not going to pay the exorbitant or high cost that is through the legal channels, and I will go to my illegal channel. And the law enforcement don't know the source. And so therefore, they just know someone over 21 is consuming or has consumed marijuana, and they don't know exactly where it came from. So that's not a good situation. And if that isn't, if people don't accept that, just look at the number of grow houses that are in Colorado, that are in California, that are in places that have legalized it. They didn't disappear, they increased, because the illegal market increased.
So I want to ask about something, just because I've been getting a ton of mailers about it on this Amendment 3. They say that Donald Trump has endorsed a yes vote on Amendment 3. Is there a difference between like the party leadership in DC, or I guess he's in Palm Beach right now, and the state party leadership on this issue? Do you see a lot of thrash on this one?
No, I mean, President Trump did say that Florida should approve Amendment 3, but he put some other recommendations with that. However, because the amendment's already written, that can't happen. So it's either an up or a down vote.
Okay.
But I don't think that for Florida at this time, that's the best situation, nor does the Republican Party of Florida. And independent thinkers think independently, which sounds like an obvious statement. But we looked after what we thought were Okaloosa County's best interests, as did the Republican Party of Florida. So everybody has their reasons for either saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. But in this instance, the Republican Party says, we don't think this is right for Florida the way it's written at this time.
So moving on to Amendment 4, which is probably the stickiest wicket out of these 6 amendments. This one has to do with regulation of abortion. And I'll probably, I need to put this in the actual video. I'll put it over our faces so people can see the actual language. It's very specific, or the language. I don't want to, change it. But what is the GOP's view on this, which I think is pretty obvious, right? But like, what is the What is y'all's main reasoning against this amendment?
So, as you know, it's already legal in the state, and the legislature has defined the parameters and boundaries that it could be administered and executed. And so that's what is right at this point for the state of Florida as defined by our representatives. So the problem with this amendment is that it's so open-ended, it is so vague, it is so encompassing that if this were to pass, it would basically be the most radical, liberalized, open-ended abortion law in all 50 states. And it was written that way intentionally because anything the legislature would then have to do, they would have their hands tied significantly because of the wording in this, that it would end up in legal battles and we would go around and have numerous court fights over what the legislature could or couldn't do based on this wording.
Okay.
So we think that the legislature ought to be our voice. It has spoken, and if people want to change the way it currently is, their avenue is through their representatives because it's already legal in the state. So if you want to change the parameters the way it's currently defined, that's through the legislature, not a throw everything out an open-ended constitutional amendment.
Would you say that one of my things that I find difficult about the referendum process, right, is that these are all things that, in theory, we could still do through our representatives. So, and this is, I believe, a ballot or a voter initiated. Is that what it's called? CICA?
Yes.
Yes. And so, would you say that the GOP's position on all of these constitutional amendments and ballot amendments is maybe moving away from those and sticking to a more like small R Republican form of government where we have representatives taking care of this stuff in Tallahassee?
Well, first of all, that's the way both the federal and the state was set up. This is the way we do business. But I don't think the Republican Party would ever say that citizen initiatives are something we want to move away from.
Okay.
But let's look at the reality in today. The citizens initiatives are usually funded by large, well funded interest groups that promote these types of initiatives. And when they go out and require the number of signatures to get on the ballot in this case, much of what they're proposing is not defined clearly. So we believe that citizen initiatives surely are going to be welcome now and in the future. But if that is such a valid thing, the legislature probably will respond in some form because they're responsive to the people's needs and they hear from them all the time. And if they don't return to Tallahassee and the new guy says, I heard you loud and clear, and he comes forward. So I don't think it's a fair assumption to say that we're moving away from it, but Republicans generally believe let the process work the way it's designed to work.
Perfect. And then last question on this one. Again, we've seen a little bit of some thrash at the top of the ticket on the national ticket from Donald Trump over this issue. Does the Okaloosa GOP see that and have some pause over whether or not they could see some blowback over this amendment's, this wording or how it goes in the future?
No, I don't think, to my knowledge, those discussions have not occurred. The Okaloosa County group does what we think is right for the citizens of our county. The state does what we think is right for the state, and the repercussions are second. And so, based on the discussions of the people that are active members, we think this amendment should not pass.
Moving on to probably one of my favorite amendments to talk about is the Homestead Exemption Inflation. I know that makes me a huge nerd. I hear it, and that's okay. But let's talk a little bit about what this ballot amendment would do, and again, how the GOP feels whether or not this thing should pass.
Yeah. So once again, the state legislature crafted these words, got it on the ballot. And so the state position and in the county is probably that it should pass for the number of reasons that says, look, let's face the reality. Our homeowner values are going up. And so even if our millage rate doesn't go up, our tax rates going up within the caps that are imposed by the state. And you look at the last 48 months, 72, 3 or 4 years of inflation, I think the reality is homeowners are being stressed to make ends meet. So this is one way that you can say that we are going to provide some relief and keep in mind the effects of inflation have on the homeowner. But as you just alluded to, and as your paper has printed on several times, the second order effect is that the city and county budgets are now going to have to do some significant relook at how they allocate funds and where their revenue sources come from, because those that come from the homeowners are probably going to be less because of the exceptions to the inflation increases for their homeowners exemption. So it places a stress on those two bodies because they've got to deal with the same inflation. They've got to deal with the same level of services. They've got to still deal with all the things that they're chartered to do, but the homeowners may have a less percentage of that total revenue in the future if this passes.
And this is a point of personal privilege, but I feel like this amendment specifically is designed to force local governments to rethink how they do taxation. And to move them more towards, for example, our sales tax or tourism development tax, things like that are more use taxes as opposed to possession taxes, as it were.
Yeah.
Is that the better way to go about it in terms of taxation, right? Because you got to pay the cops, you got to pay the firefighters. Does the GOP feel that that's the better way to go about it?
Yeah, and in this instance, I have no knowledge of how the legislature's thought process was behind this. I can just see what the result will be. And that may be a good thing, because if you want to have your local taxes determined by your local official, this pushes it down to them for them to say, we're going to increase the millage rate. So your break really isn't a break because that's what they've chosen to do. Or like you suggested, a sales tax or some other kind of a use tax or another revenue stream to make up for that. But those decisions would be made at the city and county level as opposed to the state level. And that would, again, force those people that are elected to those positions to make decisions that they maybe didn't have to make as to the degree they will in the future.
So we're off to the last of the constitutional amendments, and it's the one that's probably the most confusing for me. It's to reveal a constitutional provision providing for public campaign financing for candidates who agree to spending limits. I did not know, A, that we had this, and B, I don't know if anybody actually takes the government up on this. Is there anybody that actually uses the spending limit provision in the Constitution?
Yeah, I do not know that. I tried to look it up, but what I found was that information was not available.
Yeah.
So I went to the budgets to see if I could find anything in there, and I couldn't find anything. But in general, it was designed at a time when there was a great deal of influence coming in, big, well-funded organizations, external money, getting behind candidates, and some would say buying the office. So at some point they said, well, we'll take that out. I think everybody remembers when they started to contributed $1 to campaign that would go on your federal and state tax forms. And so all that generated from well-intended meaning and people, but in today's environment, if you're going to be a serious candidate and by the way, this is only for statewide offices, the governor, lieutenant governor, and cabinet positions. If you're going to be a serious candidate for any of those positions, you're going to exceed those campaign spending limits. So you're not going to qualify for state funds. Those candidates that don't exceed those limits probably don't have enough of a base or a support to get elected. So if they do draw state money, it is dollars not well spent because the candidate doesn't have a groundswell or a base that would get him or her into office anyway.
So it's pretty much.
So this says repeal it and just recognize the realities of campaign financing today. Which is probably a good thing.
Perfect. Moving on to our Okaloosa County referendum. November 5th, you're going to have this on your ballot as well, everybody at home. But the EDATE referendum, this will be the third vote on it. But essentially what it does is provides it provides tax exemption to businesses that have physical property in Okaloosa County who bring jobs to Okaloosa County that are, I believe, time and a half, it's 110% of the median county wage. And so in the last 10 years, they've had about 300 jobs created this way. And they've given out about $100,000 in tax rebates or exemptions, with another $600,000 set to be paid out over the next couple of years. And so that's on your ballot. We had a 4-1 vote on the county commission to put this on your ballot. One commissioner voting against it. But what is the GOP's thoughts on this one? What does it think about these kind of tax exemptions for businesses that bring jobs to the area?
Yeah, so while the local group would like to say we're firmly behind or against, we're not. We've looked at it and we've said this is one of those where the individual voter is going to have to do the pros and cons and decide for themselves. We don't see a consensus either way, so we have no position. But it boils down to basically, if you believe the county needs to incentivize further growth and expansion, it's a good thing. If you believe people are coming to Florida, businesses are coming to Florida, Okaloosa County is growing, it does not need these incentives, and those would be tax dollars better spent somewhere else, then vote no. So the limits are of interest, but it really comes down to what do you think is needed at this time for this county, and is that the right thing to incentivize growth? Yes, if you think it's already going to happen, or we don't want to see the expansion to the extent that we think it's going to bring us, we like Okaloosa in the way it appears and feels to people now, then vote no.
Well, Mo Young, Army veteran, precinct committeeman for District 33, has joined us today to talk with us about all these ballot amendments, all these constitutional amendments that are going to be on your ballot on November the 5th or beforehand if you choose to vote early or by mail. If you need more information on how to get your vote by mail or where you need to go for your precinct, voteokaloosa.gov is the place to go. If you want to find more analysis of what's going on with these elections, Mid-Bay News is the place to go. MidbayNews.com. Mo, thank you again for joining us.
Christopher, can I add one more thing?
Yes, sir, please.
Just in general, keep in mind that except for the one that repeals something that's in the Constitution, every time we add something to the state constitution, it restricts the legislature's ability to legislate in some form. And in many cases, it also requires them to then go out and figure out what was meant by what was on the ballot, that was especially the two that were put on there by the non-legislator sources that were the signature. So the ambiguity in some of that and what it says really is going to be a challenge. So as you amend the Constitution, just keep that in mind and decide whether it is worth doing or not.
It very much reminds me of the felony voting restoration one that they did in either 20 or 18, where it passed, and then the legislature had to say, like, well, what did this actually mean? And then they had to do some additional legislation to, I guess, do the specifics, like how long can you have to wait, or do you have to pay back all your fines, or all that other kind of stuff.
Exactly right.
Perfect. All right. Well, Mo, thanks again so much for your time, and we'll be seeing you at the ballot place.